Hey everybody, Ryan here at Etrailer. Today on our 2023 Jeep Wrangler 4xe, we're going to be showing you how to install the Etrailer.com Universal Brake Controller Install Kit. But before we get into that, let's just take a minute, check this out, and see if it's going to work for you. This kit's going to work for several different reasons, and probably the most popular is when you go to put a brake controller in your Jeep. And your brake controller is going to require, that it has certain inputs and is able to send certain outputs out back to your trailer. And so having this 7-way round back here is going to allow that brake signal and that power to come out of this and go into your trailer and activate the brakes. Another thing this is going to allow you to do is have that 7-way, and this is going to have 12-volt auxiliary power coming back to it. So you can almost use this as a way to charge batteries on your trailer if it's wired up properly. So maybe a pop-up camper, things like that. That way whenever you're towing it, you can kind of charge them batteries up. In order to be able to hook up this kit, you are going to have an existing 4-way flat wiring setup. So our Jeep did not have one to begin with, and we installed the Takantra 4-way flat wiring kit. Worked out real well. The good news is though, one of the things I like about this, so not only are you going to have that fully functional 7-way, but it also kind of taps off, the wiring does, and still gives you a 4-way flat. That way if you have multiple trailers or borrow a trailer that has this type of wiring, you're going to be able to plug right into that and not have to bother with getting an adapter and keeping track of it. Something I do want to mention, wireless type brake controllers are getting more and more popular. I know the Kurt Echo is one of them. And if that's what you plan on using, you don't necessarily need this exact kit. Today, we used it to be able to hook up our Red Arc Tow Pro Elite brake controller, and it worked out real well. Can't really ask for too much more. It's going to, for the most part, come with everything you're going to need. Depending on how you're trying to set things up, you might need a little bit extra wire or something. But generally speaking, this is really going to get you going in the right direction and get you started. You should end up pretty well. In terms of getting the installation done, it's not really too complicated per se, just time consuming, running a lot of wires and, just kind of setting things up. Hopefully you can take something away from how we did it and, speed things up a little bit for you. But if you'd like to see how it's done, we'll go ahead and get started on it now. To begin our installation, we'll be here at the back of our Jeep, and very first thing that I did was just take the included bracket to the self-tapping screws and secure it to the metal crossbeam under here. Gives us a good spot to mount it up. And then we can take the connector plug here, and there's a couple things that I'm going to do to it to kind of prep it, so to speak, before we put it in place. First things first, the yellow wire that's coming off the back of this, we're not going to be using it. It's for the reverse light circuit. You don't need to use it in our application. If you do, that's where it would go, to the reverse light circuit. Then if you look at other wires, we'll have a white one with the ring terminal. That's going to be ground. A black one, which will be our auxiliary power, and the blue, which will be our electric brake. I'm going to change the end out. So they come pre-attached with these style butt connectors. I like to use the heat shrinks just because the ends seal up and provide a little more secure connection, I guess, if you will, or watertight. But the other ones will work fine. Just tape them up good if you use them. But when upgrading or changing over to these, you can strip back that insulation, give the wire a twist, place the butt connector over it, and crimp it down. And this is how all of our connections are going to be made, with the butt connectors and ring terminals and things like that. So let's make sure you get it nice and tight. And then this cap here, this 4-way, I'm going to cut that dust cover off because this is going to plug into our existing 4-way, and really no need to have that cover there. But with it set up a little bit better now, we can go ahead and get it in place. Feed all the wires through, like so. This one will come back around. I get placed into that little cutout there. And then we'll bolt this up. I'm just going to take a screw, feed that through. And then a flat washer, a split lock washer, and a nut. So I'll use that same combination for our other 3 attachment points. Got our connector plug secured, and then we can take our 4-way flat, and that's going to plug into our existing 4-way flat. If you need one of these, this is a Takancha kit we put on our Jeep. Worked out real well. But I am going to take some dielectric grease and put it on the terminals. This will help keep it protected against corrosion and things like that. So pile that up on there, and then this will just essentially just plug right in. So I went ahead, put some electrical tape on our connection there and a zip tie around it just to make it semi-permanent. And we can start to hook up our wires. So you'll get a big bundle of this duplex wiring, all right? And if you just carefully kind of cut that gray sheathing back, that'll expose 2 wires inside. One will be white, one will be black. The black one, you just hook up to the black wire coming from our 7-way connector, like we talked about, using the butt connector. And same thing for this wire. So we'll take our blue and connect that to the white duplex wire. Get it crimped down, and since I opted to use these heat shrinks, I'll come back with my heat gun and seal up the ends. Point we can secure our ground wire, so just taking the included screw, and we'll go right here on the bottom of our crossbar. What I've also done is just kind of took our wiring, bundled it up, and zip tied it up out of the way. Now we can route our duplex wiring from the back here up into the front. And when you do this, you want to avoid any hot or moving parts. So I just run it up along through here, and you can use some zip ties along the way to secure it. All right, so it runs up. It's going to just continue straight. And kind of see a piece of it there. But right here in this area, there's a big hole in the frame. And what I did is put a piece of wire loom over it and fed the wire into the frame where we can continue to route it all the way up to the front. So about here in this area is where our wires are to go into the frame. You can just push it forward, and every now and again you're able to reach in and grab it and kind of zip tie it. So it just runs up along through there. You can kind of see a little piece of it there. And just run straight. And in a little bit, I'll come back and put some wire loom on this and zip tie it up and whatnot. But our wire runs straight up into the engine compartment. It's pretty wide open up there, so usually if you kind of just push it up, you're able to reach from the top down, grab it, and pull it into place. In the engine compartment, here's where our wiring comes up, and at this point you can completely remove that sheath, the gray sheath, exposing the black and white wire completely. Black one will run over to the passenger side, which we'll get to in a moment. The white one, though, you need to run inside of our Jeep. And so in this corner here, there's a grommet that's not used, so you can drill a small hole through it and take the white wire and push it all the way through to the inside. On the inside, here's where our white wire came through, and there's quite a bit of extra length left to it. And so I cut it to length, you know, have some to work with. And this eventually is going to get connected to the electric brake output for our brake controller, but we're also going to need to have a power wire that runs inside of here too. And so I took the remaining length of white wire that we cut off of that and ran it through that same grommet into the engine compartment, which will eventually get over to the battery. I do suggest doing something different to one of the wires, that way you can keep track of them. So our power wire, I just tied a little knot in it, you know, I'll cut off, you put a piece of tape or something. That way it's just easy to remember what wire does what whenever it comes to that point to hook up. We're gonna have the white wire that we ran back out into the compartment, and then the black wire that came from the wiring that we ran up here. So both of those are going to run along the firewall here. I just have them loosely routed. There's some other wires that are going on right here. Don't worry about those. Those are just for other accessories we're going to be adding in the future. So we just kind of ran everything at the same time, save some time. But concept same here. So let's just run along over near the battery. Our wires are going to run over to our breakers, which are these here, which I have mounted up to a bracket. Not a ton of good places to go with these. I mean, there's some options. You want them close to the battery if you can. So I just took a piece of metal about that long, bent it, and used one of the existing bolts right here just to clamp it on there and mount up the breakers. So we have our 20 amp breaker and a 40 amp breaker. And depending on what brake controller you're using, because the kit does come with the 30 amp as well, check the instructions, see what the brake controller recommends. Generally speaking, a 20 and the 40 is fine. So what we got here, the white wire that goes inside of our cab, that gets hooked up to the 20 amp breaker. And so on the ends, you crimp on these small ring terminals. The black wire, this is coming from our gray sheathing, all the way from the back. That's going to get hooked up to the 40 amp breaker. And you're going to want to hook both of those up to the silver posts. All right. So you carefully remove the nut, slide it over, and we'll tighten this down. You want to have these tight before we set everything else up. So I'm just using a 3/8 socket to snug these up. All right, and then we'll have some leftover wire. You'll be able to cut the black wire to length for our breaker. We had quite a bit of it. So you're going to make 2 more wires, okay, with small ring terminals. You're going to put those on the gold colored posts on our breakers. And these are just going to run right over to our battery. So I got those wires running right up through here to where we can connect it on our battery post. So the only nut on ours from the factory was this one here in the middle. You can always take that off and put these over that stud and tighten that nut back down. But since we have unused posts, I prefer to use those. I did have to get a nut though. This is an M8 by 1.25 thread pitch if that's something you want to do. But I already got something else hooked up to it here, our modulite wiring from before that we installed, so I'll pull that off. Those ends, like I said, I put on ring terminals. These are a little bit bigger though. So the ones you're going to use. And just get them in place here. About like that. Take the nut and tighten it back down. So moving back inside of the vehicle, set up our brake controller adapter plug. As far as the brake controller install kit goes, that's really about it in terms of route and everything, other than hooking up your brake controller plug and setting up your brake controller. Now, depending on your brake controller, it might be set up a little bit different than ours, but generally speaking, 99% of the time, it's all very similar. Your brake controller, the blue wire from the adapter plug on your brake controller will go to the brake output. So this is the white wire that we ran in going to the back of our 7-way. And this is the power wire that we ran in. So that'll usually go to the black wire from your brake controller adapter plug. And then a lot of times, the white wire for your brake controller will be ground. The red will be your brake signal. So it kind of just depends from there. But I do want to mention that power wire, keep in mind, since the breakers are hooked up, this is hot, so it is going to have power. So be conscious of that. You don't want to start, flailing it around and touching metal and shorting anything out. But yeah, as far as that brake controller install kit goes, that's really about it in terms of getting everything hooked up. To check everything, we can go ahead and run through the signals and whatnot. So we'll turn on our left turn, our right turn, our tail lights. We can then hit our brakes. And while we hit the brakes, we can see we have a brake output. our brake light signal, and then in that top right corner we have our auxiliary power. So everything's going like it should. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Etrailer.com Universal Brake Controller Install Kit on our 2023 Jeep Wrangler 4xe.